You were Foreign Secretary when that happened. What was the mood in government?
Horror, not least because of the manner of it, which appeared to be intended to provoke such a reaction. And I remember my first rather naive, very naive reaction was that maybe this was to do with criminal elements in Russia, because surely no government would be involved in something quite so reckless and so appalling. But I was very quickly disillusioned about that. But I mean, at that time, my recollection is that Putin was actually working very hard to make himself a respectable member of the general circuit in terms of dealing with other governments and other politicians in the way that the mainstream of international relations works.
So when you listen to what Dominic Grieve, who was in opposition at the time, was saying, talking about this need for vigilance, how did the government then measure its response when, as Jonathan said, there was also this sense of doing business with Russia in this period?
It was quite difficult to do it, actually, because, as Jonathan quite rightly said, it would have been difficult for someone officially on behalf of the government to say what Dominic Grieve said. I don't think anybody would have disagreed.
We were horrified by the Putin regime by then. The interesting thing about Western relations to Russia during this period is that we didn't have it during the Yeltsin years. It seemed to me that the West was perfectly content to allow Yeltsin, for instance, to open fire on his own parliament with tanks and shoot down people in the streets protesting against him. We gave Yeltsin a free pass. We didn't mind how he behaved, because what really concerns us about Russia is not how it behaves internally, but how it behaves externally.
Is that not in part driven by public attitudes, where public concern lies?
I don't know. It seems to me to be extraordinary looking back, even on my own feelings about it. I was in Washington when the shelling of the parliament took place, looking back how complacent I was and other people were about not only the collapse, but the rubbing out of any real trace of constitutional democracy in law.
Margaret, where do you think the public attitudes were towards Russia at this time?
I think people were welcoming of what they saw as a major change of the Gorbachev years, and then quite kind of passive about it, not seeing it as a great threat. And I think it's been brought back into focus much more recently.
And Warren Shepherd had the first question this evening.
How many countries will Russia be allowed to annex before we send them a strongly worded letter?
Sergei Javid.
Well, actually, I'd start by saying I can actually understand why Russia has some legitimate concerns about Ukraine. There is a large ethnic Russian population, and it's not unusual for them to be concerned about that. But I think what they have done this week, what we've learned, the annexation of Crimea is completely unjustifiable. It's the first time
the EU sanctions allow 33 individuals assets frozen like less and travel back. So it amounts to very much to avoid what you just described as being something that
To most people in the UK, I think the issue of Crimea didn't seem like a big thing.
Jonathan, do you think that the significance of that moment was recognised at that point, widely enough perhaps?
No, by the reaction to it, no. And I think that is partly because there was a sense that Russia's annexation had a degree of popular support in Crimea, which it certainly did. You bring together two things from the Russian perspective. One is Ukraine. Indeed, Crimea has always been Russian, deeply believed still today by most Russian people, combined with NATO's threat. We're going to lose our access to the Black Sea and to the Mediterranean. So I think there was a little bit of that going on, but I also think that people's eyes were not on the ball, because this was a major breach of international law.
We've been talking a lot about